Good evening, everybody. It is June 11th. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We've got a spicy one tonight. It's gonna get a little intense up in here for sure for our latter half. So much so, we had to take some special precautionary measures. The Breakdown's been the source of controversy over our 4 years, and in order to try to make it a little bit easier for people to know when the controversy is about to versy, we have this now. This now. It's our cancel clock. It's kind of like one of those doomsday clocks, but it's to let you know when we're getting dangerously close to getting canceled here again at The Breakdown. As you can see, it's currently 10 minutes to midnight. As we go through the show, though, that's almost for sure going to change because we're going to be leaning into some hot bed issues tonight. But we're going to start off with the lighter stuff, as we like to do, because there has been some not terrible things that have happened this week. There's been a lot of terrible things that have happened this week. We're absolutely going to be getting into that, but we're going to start with some positive forward motion. And that has to do with concerns around the air quality that exists in public schools. A lot of people have been raising a lot of concerns since, it's gotten a lot of attention since the start of COVID, but anybody who went to public school in and around my age probably knows that the air quality is sometimes not so great. I remember in my elementary and junior high school, you get the sense that things are, especially during the summer, things get a little humid. You're starting to rebreathe some things. You know it. It's the reality. There's been some people who've been calling for changes to that. And there's been a lot of reasons and excuses provided as to why or why not those changes have happened. Well, some people are taking some action. There's been a complaint filed against the CBE, but there's also been a major complaint filed with the Catholic School Board. And this has to do with the fact that there are some people who seem to believe that, and there's, according to the letter, there's good evidence for it, that it appears that maybe there were some people who were trying to convince teachers about the quality of the air and the necessity and the requirements of air filters and all of that kind of stuff, who maybe weren't so qualified to be having those conversations. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. But one thing's very, very clear. The conversation that has been going on around, and we're going to try to get into this in a little bit more detail, given the opportunity, but the conversation around air quality in schools is certainly an ongoing one. It's certainly not one that's going to go away. And that's a good thing, because one thing that we've seen very, very clearly is that there's lots of folks who are in positions of power who maybe they're just happy with the status quo. Maybe they don't want to rock the boat so much. Going to be interesting to see how that plays out. We're going to be watching it very closely, and hopefully we're going to be able to get in touch with some of the people from the organization. But we still have way more to talk about, so let's move on. We got a history lesson this week. We got a couple of history lessons this week, tragically, and a lot of them came from historical revisionism, new word, that was brought about by the re-elected Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Started off the week strong with this little tweet right here, where she said, "On this day, June 6th, we remember the bravery and sacrifice of Canadian and Allied troops who landed on Normandy beaches 79 years ago, marking the beginning of the Second World War. We pay tribute to their heroic efforts on the anniversary of D-Day." Let's be clear. The storming of Normandy, the D-Day, that's the anniversary of D-Day. That was several long whiles after the war had started up. It had been going on for a little bit while, but it's another example, another very strong example of and we've got a couple of them tonight, of how Danielle Smith doesn't seem to really be able to wrap her head around what has actually happened when it comes to history and what we're supposed to take out of historic events. Because let's not forget this train wreck.
Notice you're not wearing a poppy, I'm not wearing a poppy, but they ruined it for me this year.
They ruined it for her that year. Danielle Smith had Remembrance Day ruined for her. Now, I did a big rant about that a while ago, and I got another rant that I'm going to do tonight, not about this. Needless to say, Danielle Smith's grasp of historical events and the significance, excuse me, the significance of historical events seems to be, let's go with tenuous to start with, because we're going to swing from here into another piece of revisionist history by Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith appeared on her former co-workers program, Real Talk with Ron Jasperson, this week, and she had some thoughts, and she had some answers to some questions. We're going to go through a couple of those.
Back moderate or progressive conservatives a priority for you? And if so, how will you do it?
Well, you have to remember that Thomas Lukasik and Doug Griffiths both quit the caucus when Jim Prentice tried to bring the parties together. So they haven't been part of the conservative movement for a long time. And I'm of the view that people just need to judge us based on what we do. And I think as opposed to creating fear, I should maybe also confirm no one will pay for a family doctor. No one's going to have their pension taken away from them. Those are two messages that were constantly pounded over the last 2 months. Those are not going to happen. And when people see that they do not happen, they have not happened, I think that they'll be a little more careful about believing everything that they see in ads.
Danielle Smith coming in hot saying, you know what? You got to be careful what you believe because people say things and sometimes those things just aren't true. And you really need to pay attention to who's saying the things and how they're saying them because, they could just be making stuff up like she did in the first part of her answer there. Because it didn't take very long for those two former MLAs, Thomas Lukasik being one of them, Doug Griffiths being the other, to issue a little bit of a clarification. And Mr. Lukasik certainly didn't pull at any punches. A bold lie. Danielle, can you be honest just once? Doug Griffiths resigned his seat in protest to your floor crossing. It wasn't about, Lukasik seems to be saying, it wasn't about the parties being merged. It was about you. I resigned cabinet in 2014 to run for the PC leadership and then ran as a PC in 2015. Please apologize to Doug and me. Now, that came after we may or may not have tagged Mr. Lukasik saying, that's really weird because we seem to remember him running in 2015. And if he left after Danielle Smith, timelines are hard. Doug Griffiths also issued on the Twitter machine his own clarification statement. So I've been away in the U.S. doing work with communities. I can confirm that I resigned because Danielle Smith crossed the floor. I resigned because she has no integrity. I do not expect her to have any now. None of this is a surprise. So just to kind of recap a little bit there. Danielle Smith says, hey, you know what? You have to judge people based on what they do because you got to have reliable, accurate sources of information. But she spent the first 20, 30 seconds before that literally lying, literally making stuff up. So that sets a bit of a tone, but the tone got worse because, as always, with Danielle Smith, she's just getting started.
Expert that we talked to indicates the significant factor that climate change is playing on our susceptibility to wildfire, and on the conditions that lead to these massive blazes earlier and earlier in the season. So how do you reconcile those two?
Well, I think you're watching, as I am, the number of stories about arson. And I'm very concerned that there are arsonists, and there have been stories as well that we're investigating, and we're bringing in arson investigators from outside the province. We have almost 175 fires with no known cause at the moment. Sometimes they're very easy to trace. When you have lightning storms, that's easy to trace. When you have a train derailment, that's easy to trace, campfire. But to have 175 fires that we don't know the cause of, that's unusual.
But the conditions that allow the fires to grow as big as that, whether or not somebody starts, a human carelessness leads to the start of the fire, the conditions under which that fire can grow to such a massive degree. We've had wildfire experts on the show telling us that arson is not a leading cause of wildfires based on the science.
Well, I would say that we have to do a better job as government in making sure that we're building fire guards, because I think that the issue that we had faced is there's a lot of communities that we know from what happened in Slave Lake and what happened in Fort McMurray, that you have to make sure that when a forest fire begins, that it doesn't jump over into a town or a city, because that's when you end up with real trouble.
So Danielle Smith does an excellent job of completely not answering the question that she was asked. What Mr. Jesperson appeared to be asking Danielle Smith was, hey, so do you acknowledge that the fire season is worse, the severity of the fires is worse because of the amount of combustible material, and that combustible material exists because of climate change, which is something that the experts are very, very clear on. An easy way to think about it is if you spill half a cup of gasoline on the ground, it doesn't matter whether or not somebody flicks a cigarette butt into it or drops a match into it or a lightning strike starts it. Because of the limited amount of fuel that exists, the fire's only going to get so big. But if you have liters and liters and liters spread off across the ground, and then one of those things happens, the fire's going to be that much worse, which is the point. We are seeing drier and drier conditions, not just in Alberta, but across the globe, where, because of those drier conditions, when fires start, for whatever reason, the fires are way, way worse. Danielle Smith's response to that in that conversation was, well, we need to do a better job of fighting fires. We need to have fire guards, because when these fires start, she didn't address the underlying question that exists around, okay, so this is happening because of climate change. How do we deal with that? Do you acknowledge that? She didn't acknowledge it at all. Now, one of the things that Danielle Smith talked about is that it's very easy to trace some fires, much like it's starting to appear more and more that it's very easy to trace where Danielle Smith gets her ideas from. Because if you go to her locals page, people have been talking about for weeks. Oh, it's the arsonists. They're setting all these fires. That's why things are so bad. They're coming after our oil and gas, don't you know? Even though there's no evidence for that being a conspiracy or being a driving factor or being why the fires are worse. The fires are worse because stuff's drier. But this has been an ongoing conversation on her locals page for quite some time. And we can't even wrap our heads around why Danielle Smith even still has a locals page. She's the premier of the province. Presumably, I mean, best odds for at least another 4 years for her. Although if we're to take some of the things that Mr. Lukasik said in our conversation with him, maybe not so long. Maybe Danielle Smith's got some problems coming her way. Named Brian Sheen. But we'll leave that alone for now. The fact is, Danielle Smith's been getting these ideas from her locals page. And Danielle Smith also still, after we had an election where the biggest conversations, the biggest issues were centered around, hey, Danielle Smith said some things, and then these people went and did some things. Maybe we should be a little bit more cautious about Danielle Smith saying some of the things, because some of her audience, for reasons that defy anything, some of her audience believe her. They take it as cues that this is what's actually happening. This is what's actually going on. And it didn't take very long before Danielle Smith's appearance on Jesperson was cited as evidence by her locals page that there's probably some arson going on, and that's why the fires are so bad. User at Webster21 from Danielle Smith's local page said, first of all, linked to Mr. Jesperson's podcast, and then said, taking quotes from Smith, but we have 175 fires that we don't know the cause for. That's unusual, Smith said. We've had experts on the show telling us that arson is not a leading cause of the wildfires based on science, Jesperson said with a little sort of, I'm not sure about that emoji. Smith told Jesperson she thinks he is watching the same number of stories about arson in the province as she is. I'm very concerned that there are arsonists, Smith said. So the tail is wagging the dog at the same time as the dog is being eaten. The dog is eating its own tail. Like there's so many layers of circular messaging and logic that are going on because Danielle Smith doesn't seem to have any awareness of the fact that her position as premier gives her, for reasons, whether it's deserved or not, a certain degree of credibility. People listen to her. And when she floats these conspiracy theories that she's getting from sources that are not good, let's say, there's a lot of people who listen to that and go, see, we were right. Even though she's getting it, it seems like, from the sources that she's repeating it back to. So it's all a bit of a train wreck. But that wasn't the only news that we had this week, because Danielle Smith announced her new cabinet. And there's some stuff going on here. First of all, it's not quite as big as her last cabinet. She knocked it down to 24 cabinet members plus Smith. Now, a lot of people have said 24 plus Smith, 25. Why is that? That seems like why did she decrease it? She seems to like to be able to pay her friends to be her friends. So why would she possibly decrease the cabinet size? And the answer is really simple. She doesn't need to pay him. Danielle Smith stacked her first cabinet with just enough cabinet members to ensure that she had people who were in her cabinet that outnumbered the people in the UCP who weren't. There's a thing called cabinet solidarity rule. And on certain bills, when the premier says this is going to be a cabinet solidarity issue, that means that all cabinet ministers have to vote as she tells them to. It's a whipped vote, but it's like a really whipped vote. So the reason why there's 24 cabinet ministers plus Smith is because there's 48 UCP MLAs. She has 25 votes guaranteed, locked up in the bag, because she's got this giant cabinet that she can tell what to do. Now, we're going to do a deep dive into the cabinet a little bit later on. It's not going to be part of this episode because there's some appointments that are, let's go with striking. But there's a couple other things that we wanted to highlight, because after the cabinet announcement came a press conference, and there were some things that were said. Now, to start with, let's go back and just remember, like 4 or 5 minutes ago, we talked about the fact that Danielle Smith was asked, hey, so the climate change, it's making the fires worse. Should we do anything about that? And she said, get better at fighting fires, I guess. One reporter made it crystal clear the question that they wanted an answer to.
A yes or no from me. Do you believe in the science of human-caused climate change?
Well, yes, we have to reduce emissions.
Danielle Smith then went on to say, you know what, but the feds, the goals, they're unrealistic. We need till 2050. We can't do it by 2035. It's so unrealistic. We'll just let the province, I guess, burn in the meantime. But she made it very clear there. And there was a little bit of pushback from some folks who were like, wait a second, Danielle Smith believes in climate change. She acknowledges that human behavior drives climate change. She's acknowledging, by extension of that human behavior is one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing these big fires, regardless of what the initial source of ignition is. There's some people who are a little unhappy about that. But that didn't match the people who were not just unhappy, but incredulous about one of Danielle Smith's cabinet ministers and her comments about that cabinet minister.
Dave Kaiser, Global News. Good afternoon, Premier. Wondering, Adriana LaGrange, who has an anti-abortion past here, she's been the president of Red Deer Pro-Life, currently a board member of Alberta Pro-Life. There's already reaction, people upset, wondering how she'll represent them like you vowed to represent all Albertans when you won on election night.
Everyone knows my position on the issue of choice, and my position hasn't changed, nor has the position of our government. Everyone also knows that Adriana LaGrange is one of our most competent ministers. She's done a tremendous job in education. We have an enormous task ahead of us in healthcare to implement our agenda. Everyone also knows what our agenda is in healthcare. It's to make sure everyone has a family doctor or primary care practitioner. It's to expand our continuing care system, and it's to make sure we continue to make progress on EMS response time, on hospital wait times, and on surgical wait times. Those are the things that she will be focused on, and those are the things that our government will do.
It's such a spit take moment. It's one that I can't. I've been trying. I practiced today. I was going to try to do this with a straight face, but I just can't. Adriana Lagrange is one of our most competent cabinet ministers. Is a really bold statement to make, because either that's another classic Danielle Smith, I don't know, lie, or the bar has just gotten so much lower. Adriana Lagrange was determined by the ethics commissioner to either be lying or have a memory that was unreliable. And we know that because the ethics commissioner did an investigation into exactly how it was that one of Adriana Lagrange's constituents and donor companies was able to get a chunk of the mask contract when masks were first announced that they were going to be given, two masks being given to every kid who was returning to school. Now we just re-released that episode. So if you're listening to the podcast version, or if you're watching this, just go back one video back, and you'll see it's all there. We actually mashed together 3 episodes in order to put the whole story in one place. It's only about a half an hour, but it's pretty damning stuff. Adriana Lagrange was also the acting health minister when everybody was on vacation for the best summer ever, and COVID cases surged, and the government did. Oh, nothing. They did nothing. They just kind of sat on their hands. So it seems like more than anything, and we'll talk for a second about this one health appointment because there's been some speculation on it. It seems like more than anything, Danielle Smith has certain ministries that she intends to run off of the corner of her desk. She said it before. She said previously in the previous government with the previous cabinet that she was going to be directly running Ministry of Health, Ministry of Energy. Those were her 2 big ones that she was super invested in. Why would an election have possibly changed that? So does it make sense to put somebody in the Ministry of Health who's going to be a strong advocate for a public health care system, or does it make sense to have someone who does pretty much what they're told? A lot of people have been dumping on Adriana Lagrange saying, oh, she was the one who ran the curriculum. If you take a look at what the worst part of the curriculum was, when we're talking about the social studies curriculum, which was the particularly train wrecky part of the curriculum, that wasn't Adriana Lagrange's sandbox. That was Jason Kenney's sandbox. Jason Kenney hired one of his buddies who, I guess, writes, if you wanted to call it that, some things for a little publication that has a similar to Danielle Smith approach to history, let's say. I feel like that's a safe statement to make, allegedly. But that whole social studies curriculum was largely curated by Jason Kenney's bestie. And Adriana Lagrange let that happen. So it seems like more than anything, this particular appointment might be because Adriana Lagrange will be a very, very good poodle, and she'll do exactly and no more and no less than what Danielle Smith tells her is going to happen. So there's that. But there was one fun little moment that came out of the presser. With so much of the conversation having to do with climate change this week. We have smoke back here all across the province again. There was international news coverage where people in New York were being a little bit irritated because they were getting some smoke. And apparently, I didn't know this was possible. But apparently the air quality in New York got worse. I didn't know that could be a thing, but apparently it did. So there was people who are in New York were upset about the fires. So the fires that are going on in Canada, the wildfires that are going on in Canada, are literally making international news right now. It's been a big part of the conversation. And it seems like a lot of politicians on all sides of the spectrum are doing everything they can to dance around the issue. So when this little moment happened during the press conference, it's just too good to not share again.
Students who have joined Alberta in the last few years, especially in Calgary and Edmonton. So what's your plan to help the school boards meet that growing demand?
Well, I think one of the things we have to remember is that from 2014 until very recently, we were seeing people leave our province. We had 39 consecutive months where people left our province, and because of the policies that we implemented, people are excited to move here again. and people are.
Now, for those of you who aren't watching the video version, you're not getting the full gimmick there, because Rick McIver, who incessantly wears sunglasses at press conferences, and we've made some jokes about that. There were a couple of other MLAs, or I guess ministers, who were wearing sunglasses at press conferences, but it's a pretty basic rule of communications that when you're facing the public, putting up barriers, it creates some questions. So it's a great little bit. It's worth watching. If you're listening to the audio version, you should totally just check out our Twitter feed, because we put it up as a separate tweet, because it's so awesome, because Rick McIver has to move out of the sun. That being said, it's time to move the clock up a little bit here, because we're about to get into it. 5 minutes to midnight on the cancel clock. I think we might hit midnight tonight. Because the next thing that we're going to talk about is Pride. Because it's Pride Month in Canada. We've been talking about this a little bit off and on. And it's been a fascinating little week so far. Well, week and a half, I guess now. There's been some interesting reactions to Pride. We're going to talk about some of those. But before we do, we need to get into a little bit of history. Because Pride is many, many things to many, many different people. It's important to highlight that Pride originally started as a protest. What was it protesting? That's what we're going to talk about in a sec. It's also evolved into a celebration, because those protests did drive change. But there's some things that we need to sort of put in context before we get too far into things. Let's take a look at the state of the world before we take a look at the state of Alberta and Canada. And when we take a look at the state of the world, homosexuality is illegal, criminal, in 62 countries across the world. It is punishable by death in 8 of those 62 countries, for simply being who you are, for simply loving who you love. You can be put to death. Same-sex marriage is legal in only 55 countries and territories. One of the other ones we have to talk about is the fact that you can change your legal gender in 103 countries and territories, but of those, 34 require surgery. So in order to change your gender, to transition, in order to have that legally recognized, it's not enough to do hormone therapy. You have to get the surgery before these governments will acknowledge your gender change. This is the world today. But I think that the most important one to highlight is, again, in 62 countries across the world, it is illegal to simply be who you are. And in 8 of those 62, they will put you to death. That's the reality. That's the world today. These are the stakes that we're talking about. Now, there's a lot of people who go, but we're in Canada. It's fine. Well, when you take a look at Canada's track record, it's not so fine. Up until 1973, homosexuality was considered to be a mental illness. Treatments that were used to treat homosexual orientation included electroshock therapy, conversion therapies, and lobotomies, where they would literally remove parts of people's brain to fix the gay. Being gay in Canada was illegal until 1969. And you might think to yourself, it's criminal. Well, it was a different time. From 1803 to 1869, it was a capital crime. So if you're expressing in any way, if you're feeling in any way, any kind of horror or shock or revulsion that there are 8 countries in the world that will kill people for being gay, 150 years ago, Canada was one of those. It was only in 1995 that Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was acknowledged to, and this is the section on equality rights, it was acknowledged that it extended to sexual orientation. The Supreme Court ruled on that. It's done. People's sexual orientation, their gender, is protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms under Section 15. Period. End of sentence. So you might be feeling pretty good about, well, Canada, we've made some progress. Same-sex marriage in Alberta only happened in 2005. And it didn't happen easily. Because in the year 2000, Ralph Klein invoked the notwithstanding clause to block same-sex marriage in Alberta. The only reason why it flipped in 2005 is because Klein read the room and realized not only was he going to alienate a lot of voters if he held on to that point, but he wouldn't win a Supreme Court challenge. And the way that the notwithstanding clause works is from the moment that you say, for cultural reasons, we're going to tap out of this part, you get 5 years. It's only good for 5 years. And after 5 years, it's got to be renewed or challenged in court. Klein decided not to do that. And it's only because Klein's notwithstanding clause invocation expired that gay marriage became a thing in the province of Alberta. Like I said at the beginning, Pride's roots. And I want to be clear. I know I'm the cisgender, middle-aged, straight white guy talking about Pride. I got to be clear. We have people who work on the background of this show. This is probably one of the most thought out little rants that we've done here. And it's not just Nate speaking for Nate. This is Nate speaking on behalf of members of the team here. This is Nate speaking to people who are friends and family. So this isn't just middle-aged white guy doing a rant. But in case you were worried, we did. It is still 5 minutes to midnight on the cancel clock. We're about to hit midnight, though. Pride's roots lie in protest. The whole reason Pride is a thing is because when we talk about the state of the world today, where you can be killed in 8 countries simply for being who you are, there's still work to be done. There's still plenty to protest. And when we take a look at Canada's history and how Canada has treated the LGBTQ2S+ community since its inception, where from 1803 to 1869, it was a capital crime. You could be put to death in Canada simply for being LGBTQ2S+. Pride is a protest of those things, but it's also a celebration of the fact that the ideals that Canada aspires to have generated some progress. You can get married as a same-sex couple now in Canada. It is not criminal to be LGBTQ2S+. That is progress that has been made. And not only does that progress speak to simply righting injustices, it also speaks to how Canada does the business of trying to be a better Canada. And I've got to be clear, we still have work to do. I've said that over and over again. I will continue to say it because we do have a lot of work to do still. But there has work that has been done. The systems, the Supreme Court said, no, even though it isn't explicitly named in Section 15, the intent is there. It's protected. Go wait in the car. The systems that make Canada work. It speaks to the ideals about what Canada is supposed to be. It speaks to the ideas that Canada is supposed to be a country where people from different cultures, different faiths, different backgrounds can peacefully coexist together. Sometimes we don't do a great job of it. But those are the ideals that Canada strives for. Those are the ideals that need to be celebrated. And those are the ideals that, in part, Pride celebrates. Which brings us to what we're all here is pretty sure is about to be midnight. Because we do have to talk about the audio leak that happened this week.
Well, I'll tell you, you were out to lunch. If you think it's acceptable to not show up because you think that there's some pride activities going on at school, right? Oh, that's fine. You know, because I'm going to show my opinion by hanging out at the mall. But meanwhile, all of those kids who are, you know, involved in, say, the Gay Street Alliance or whatever, I don't even know if we have that anymore in our school, they're here when we did Ramadan for Lion Time. And they're showing respect in the class for your religion, right? For your beliefs. It goes two ways. If you want to be respected for who you are, if you don't want to suffer prejudice for your religion, your color of skin, your whatever, then you better give it back to people who are different from you. That's how it works. It's an exchange. And it isn't like that in all countries. As I told you, in Uganda, literally, if they think you're gay, they will execute you. If you believe that kind of thing, then you don't belong here. Because that is not what Canada believes. We believe in freedom. We believe that people can marry whomever they want. That is in the law. And if you don't think that should be the law, you can't be Canadian. You don't belong here, and I mean it. I really mean it. And it's not a joke, Mansour. I said back and forth. You want it, you got to give it. It just makes me angry. Sorry, I'm a little worked up.
Now, that teacher even acknowledged at the end of the clip there, she's a little worked up. Before we get into the clip, there's a couple things that we have to highlight. We don't know what came before it. We don't know what came after it. We don't know what the context is. All we know is that this is a recording that occurred in a school in Edmonton where this teacher was expressing her frustration, ostensibly to her students, that there were kids who decided that rather than go to school because Pride was being acknowledged, they were going to go hang out at the mall, apparently. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this clip, but before we do, we have to take a look at what some of the responses were, because the school organization absolutely put out a response. So this is from the Londonderry School. And the letter reads, "Dear parents and guardians, many of you may have heard an audio recording of a teacher at Londonderry School circulating on social media channels. I want to emphasize that the views expressed by the teacher do not reflect the values of acceptance, inclusion, and belonging that are so strong at Londonderry School. We know that words matter and they have the ability to bring us together and also divide us. I want to assure you that we're addressing the situation accordingly. As I shared in my last message, we recognize Pride Month and National Indigenous History Month in June. Our school community is incredibly rich and diverse, and I'm inspired by it every day. The diversity and sense of belonging at school enriches student learning and experiences. Throughout next week, Pride Week may be mentioned during the daily announcements as a way to highlight activities. There may also be materials like posters in the common areas of the school, as well as some of the activities for those that wish to participate. Pride Week is an opportunity to reflect the importance of being kind and accepting to all people. Students of all ages deserve to have their unique families and identities represented positively. So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to the school." Now, the last 3/4 of that letter aren't terrible. But the first part is maybe not the best framing of things. Because in the first part, where they say the views expressed by the teacher do not reflect the values of acceptance, inclusion, and belonging that are so strong at Londonderry School. What that teacher, based on the recording that's available publicly, what that teacher seemed to be saying is, you know what? We do have values of acceptance, inclusion, and belonging in Canada. They are embedded in the charter. There's a thing called social contract, which is when you agree to get the benefits of being part of a society, you also agree to the rules that exist within that society. It has been pointed out in other places that this teacher was very clearly, and she even acknowledged it herself at the end of the video, she's pretty fired up. But when we take a look at the history of Canada, when we take a look that for almost 100 years, it was a capital crime to be LGBTQ2S+ in Canada, there's a lot to be fired up for. Now, she used in that recording the example of Ramadan. She talked about the fact that the school recognized Ramadan and taught other kids about what Ramadan was. And it's not okay to have your beliefs, your culture, your identity represented, and then to rebuke and disavow and refuse to be part of the conversation, to express intolerance of who are LGBTQ2S+. That was the example. That was the only place in that entire rant that she said anything in any way affiliated with Islam. But it provoked a pretty big response from some members of the Islamic community. One thing I want to be clear on before we go any further: if Islamophobia is the fear of Islam, I can't help but think that to not be willing to have this conversation, to not be willing to entertain these questions for fear of outrage, to not be willing to take a step back and say, hey, was it Islamophobic though? For fear of outrage, for fear of cancellation, that represents a particularly ugly form of Islamophobia. But let's go to one of the responses. The NCCM, or the National Canadian Council for Muslims, tweeted this out. We are greatly concerned after an audio recording is circulated of a teacher engaging in deeply Islamophobic, inappropriate, and harassing behavior towards Muslim students at Londonderry School in Edmonton. This is unacceptable. While we know that the school administration has apologized for this behavior, we will be following up to determine what steps are being taken to challenge hate and discrimination. Now, before we go any further, we want to be clear. We reached out to the NCCM. We sent them an email 4 days ago. And we said, hey, we'd like to get some clarification here. We'd like to get a little bit of background on what precisely it was about what this teacher said that was deeply Islamophobic. We're still waiting for a response. There's no question that the teacher was really, really animated. There's no question that she used Ramadan as an example of how that school tries to live out their values of acceptance, inclusion, and belonging. And she was asking the question, why do you feel that it's appropriate that we observe and we try to educate in the spirit of tolerance as Canadians? We try to learn about what's going on with all the other parts of this place that's called Canada. You don't get to just check out of that. And it's a very false equivalency for a lot of reasons, because we looked and we couldn't find any records where in Canada, for someone being Muslim, now there's all kinds of problems going on in Quebec, and there's been some really horrifying things that have been said about head coverings. We've made our position on the show very clear about that before. If somebody wants to wear religious garb or head covering, and it's their choice, then it's their choice, and it's none of your concern. But it's not illegal to be Muslim in Canada. And while there are countries that don't recognize Islam as a faith, they don't give them official status, and that's wrong to our minds. There are no countries where Islam as a broad faith is illegal. There are Islamic countries where other versions of Islam or other branches of Islam are aggressively persecuted. There are no places where it is criminal to practice Islam. And there shouldn't be. There also shouldn't be places in the world where people can be put to death for being gay. But there are. So when we're comparing uphill battles, to try to equate the two is really apples and oranges. We can't find in that statement, and when we open it up to the Twitter Spaces, we're more than happy to hear it, but we can't find in that statement anything that could be reasonably characterized as deeply Islamophobic. We have problems with hate crimes in this province. Hate crimes are on the rise in Alberta. But when we start throwing around rhetoric and making accusations about somebody being deeply Islamophobic, when all they did was used a holiday that school recognized, that they very clearly supported that school recognizing, as an example of this is how tolerance works. This is how inclusivity works. To immediately jump to that being deeply Islamophobic is deeply problematic, because there are people in this province, especially around our capital city, who are being assaulted for wearing religious clothing. There are people who are being viciously and violently targeted because they're Muslim. That is unacceptable. And it should be condemned by absolutely everyone. But it doesn't mean that anytime anyone mentions anything that has to do with Islam, that it's Islamophobic. This teacher was clearly arguing for tolerance. The question at the core of this is, do we believe that the values that make Canada, Canada, and all the things that Canada aspires to be are worth defending and advocating for? Public schools are responsible for a lot of things. Some of those things include teaching core Canadian values. It's in the curriculum. One of those values is tolerance. To suggest, even passively, that passionately arguing for tolerance is in some way Islamophobic is to say that Islam is a religion of intolerance, and I don't believe that to be true. I want to be clear. I believe, as does everybody affiliated with the show, in freedom of religion, and so does the Charter. The same section that we talked about earlier, Section 15. That section that affords members of the LGBTQ2S plus community the protection of the Charter also affords religion the same thing. We're also talking about a public space and the notion that any religion inside of the borders of Canada gets to be intolerant of public spaces of other Canadians for simply existing is antithetical to Canadian values. There's no record of anyone telling these kids, any of the kids in the school, that they couldn't be Muslim. But as we heard from Thomas Lukasik, he was getting, because he used to be the Minister of Education, he was getting messages from people who were saying that parents were pulling their kids out of schools so that they didn't have to be exposed to the gay. Canada has defined these values. It has codified these values. It has made these values law. And if you have a problem with these values, then you have a problem with not only the Supreme Court of Canada, who have upheld these laws, you have a problem with the values of Canada. And that is not representative of all of the Muslims that we talked to this week. And when we open the spaces up, if anybody wants to tell me how I'm wrong or tell me how the people that we spoke to this week are wrong, we're all here to hear it. But this weaponization of religion has to stop. Here's a really easy way to know whether or not you're on the right side or the wrong side of an issue. When the convoy folk are spreading memes that show the backs of a crusader and the back of an Islamic warrior facing this wall of the gay, and they've got their swords drawn and they say together, that's a really good sign that it's time to pump the brakes. There are a lot of people who believe and who practice Islam from a place of peace, from a place of tolerance. Those people need to be speaking out a whole lot louder than they are right now, quite frankly. Because when you have organizations like the NCCM who are putting out these hyperbolic statements that minimize the severity of what actual hate crimes look like, and that target a teacher who was trying to argue for the values of acceptance, inclusion, and belonging, and whose apparent only sin was the fact that she used the example of, like we did for Ramadan. She could have used any number of other holidays. She could have said Halloween. She could have said Easter. She could have said Christmas. There's no shortage of holidays and religious dates that are recognized in the school system that she could have used. And you have to ask, would this conversation be being framed as Islamophobic if she had used any of those examples? If she had said Easter or Christmas? Would we see the Catholic Church saying, hey, you know what? That was offside, y'all. Learning about the oppression that the LGBTQ2S+ community has experienced in Canada and continues to experience around the world. And I want to be clear, we've had conversations with people this week who are LGBTQ2S+, who have been very clear that before they travel, they check to see what the laws are in that country. Because if they get found out for being gay in the wrong country, they can be put to death. Learning about this oppression is no different than learning about any other form of Canadian history. As the saying goes, those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. When we have parents withholding their kids from school, when we have kids in schools apparently choosing to go to the mall instead of learning the history of Canada, learning the history of pride, learning how when you stand up for human rights, you're not just standing up for one demographic. You shouldn't be. when we have kids who are choosing not to learn those lessons, we are setting ourselves up for the fact that they could very easily be choosing to repeat those same mistakes that are ongoing in the world. I know I've said it a bunch of times already, but I'm going to say it again. Homosexuality is illegal. It is criminalized in 62 countries, and it is punishable by death in 8 of them. Pride is a celebration, but it's also a protest. And there's still a lot of things to protest. There have been a lot of stories this week and a half about Pride events being disrupted. There's been a lot of stories this week and a lot of examples about people taking their pickup trucks or their muscle cars and doing burnouts on Pride sidewalks. That happened here in this province. The intolerance is very much here. And here's the thing that everybody needs to realize. Certain groups have more privilege than other groups. And I recognize I got a boatload of privilege. That's one of the reasons why I do the show. That's one of the reasons why I stick my neck out. That's one of the reasons why the council clock is set to midnight right now, because I know what's coming my way over the next 4 or 5 days. But I can use my privilege to make the argument that, yeah, I'm not gay. They're not coming for me, but I still have to care. I still have to speak out against intolerance. Yeah, I'm not Muslim, but I still have to care. I still have to speak out against intolerance. This notion that we can exist in a society where we just get to pick and choose who we're going to treat with respect is toxic. For us to function as the country that Canada aspires to be, we have to be willing to learn about all the other people that make up this country. We have to be willing to listen to their stories. We have to be willing to acknowledge how in Canada there has been and continues to be oppression against certain groups. And if we're not willing to acknowledge that and listen to that, then we are fundamentally disregarding the codified legal values of what it means to be Canadian. And that teacher's not wrong. Because if you've made the decision that you're going to turn your back on the values of Canada, you have broken the social contract. You are rebuking the things that Canada is trying to be. And you are, by your own choice, saying, I don't want to be a part of this society. That's not the country, I think, that any of us want. And that's our scheduled program. At this point now, we're gonna open it up to the floor. We're gonna see where this goes. I haven't taken a look at the speakers yet, so I'm just gonna quickly take a quick look to see if we have anyone. It doesn't look like we have anyone yet, so I'm gonna reissue the invitation. If anything that I've said here tonight you take umbrage with, if you think that I'm factually wrong about any of these things, if whether or not you want to talk about the whole Pride Islam thing, whether or not you want to talk about the Danielle Smith doesn't know history, or whether or not you want to talk about I'm going to take a shot in the dark that maybe we're going to be talking about the question of the air quality, and then we'll go from there. So we have, I could be wrong. I seem to recall, though, that one of the signatories for the letter that went to the Calgary Catholic School Board in regards to the air quality was a PhD of the Dr. Ed. I have what appears to be a Dr. Ed ready to be as a speaker, so let's see whether or not I'm reading the tea leaves right. Dr. Ed, what's going on tonight?
Hey, Nate, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Fantastic, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm the Dr. Ed on the complaint.
Perfect.
So I appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit on this issue.
The floor is yours, man.
So I think that people had already pointed out that this complaint, this APEGA complaint, had also happened with the CBE. A similar, like APEGA complaint, professional complaint, was issued. But I think a lot of people are not aware of why this particular complaint is extremely important. And it has to do with the way that information gets to the Calgary Catholic School District Board. That is, on December 5th, 2022, the CCSD held a special board meeting to determine the illness mitigation strategy in light of Calgary Children's Hospitals being over capacity. You probably all recall this story. And of course, according to the public minutes, this meeting was called to order at 9:55 a.m. and adjourned at 9:58 a.m. So 3 minutes was how long they spent on our illness mitigation strategy. That 3-minute meeting included an opening prayer, a territorial acknowledgement, and a closing prayer. While no CCSD parent voices were heard, a recommendation written by the CCSD superintendent, Brad McDonald, was quickly approved in this 3-minute meeting. So Brad McDonald, this person is not only an important voice, he's the only voice that gets heard. And what I mean by only voice is that on December 16th, 2022, when CCSD parents wrote a letter for permission to speak about indoor air quality to the CCSD board, they received an email response from CCSD board chair Kathy Williams that said, and I quote, "We believe that the concerns expressed are operational in nature. The requests are therefore denied." So parents, even though parents in the Calgary Board of Education, the Edmonton Public School Board, and multiple school districts in Ontario have made space for listening to air quality concerns for our children in schools, the CCSD has been stonewalling parents for speaking about air quality in schools. And so more wildfires will only make this problem worse for our children.
I can't, I'm not laughing because I'm laughing because I'm thinking to myself as you're talking about a 3-minute meeting that had a prayer, a land acknowledgement, and then another prayer. On a good day, it takes me 3 minutes to figure out what pair of socks I'm going to choose. To try to present that there's some sort of any kind of discussion, given either your land acknowledgement sucks and your prayers suck. Even if you go down that road, there's still not enough time to have any kind of informed. It took me more than a little while, and I have a feeling I actually owe you an apology. Because I think you called in a while ago and you were talking about carbon dioxide levels, and I was like, I don't really get it. And then I did some reading after because I was like, I didn't get it. I didn't understand what you were saying. But I think what you were trying to say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if it was you, and if it's not, then this just got all kinds of awkward. But if it was you, I think what you were trying to say is that the higher levels of carbon dioxide show that there is worsening qualities of recirculating air. It means that less and less air is being recirculated. Am I getting that right now?
Yeah. So this is the thing about fires is during all of the Calgary, like the fires in Calgary, I'm not sure if a lot of people know, but every single HVAC system in Calgary Catholic was turned off for the duration of 3 days, where carbon dioxide levels reached approximately 5,000, close to 5,000 ppm, which is just like, it's not even like safe, not even close to safe kind of conditions. And that was in every school. But the worst thing was that they never told any parents about the changes that they had made to the HVAC system. They didn't tell us that everything was turned off. And when we asked, why did you turn off these systems? What we were told was, well, it smells smoky outside and people don't like the smoke. And so as a result, like every single child in CCSD was hotboxing inside their schools. And so I think like if they at least told us that, hey, we're going to be turning this off, we could have told all of our children to wear masks or to do other things to protect ourselves. But that option was never given to any of our children. And this is why this is so important. It's because no one has a say about indoor air quality except for Brad. He is the one and the only, like the buck stops with him. He gets to make all of the decisions related to air quality, and we can't say anything about it. And we've been trying this for a very long time, and we haven't gotten anywhere. So you're right. Like basically, what you should see in schools is under 1,000 ppm. But if you went to any Calgary Catholic school, you'd be hard pressed to find anything less than 1,500 to 2,000. It's very rare that it's ever less than that. So nothing has been done on air quality, and we ask, like, it's really important. If Brad is the only person permitted to speak to the CCSD board about the operations of indoor air quality, then it's crucial that his recommendations are based on science and not on ideology. Like CCSD parents are like, parents in Calgary Catholic are just confused if Brad McDonald's recommendations, if those should be followed, especially when they conflict with ASHRAE's own core guidelines. And so that's the struggle that we have, is who do we believe?
Now,
when you say
ASHRAE,
yeah.
just because you're using some vernacular there, and I'm not
I'm sorry.
bright at all. I'm being a little facetious, but not that facetious. I'm really not that bright. What are you talking about when you say ASHRAE?
Right. ASHRAE is basically the way I describe it is the group American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers. And what they do is they deal with a lot of the HVAC recommendations that goes into schools. And so most schools will say that we follow the ASHRAE core guidelines. So they created core guidelines for indoor spaces. And so most schools said that they were following these. However, when the Calgary Catholic did it, they did send an email out to all parents and said, yes, we follow all of the ASHRAE standards, but they never tested it. And commissioning, that is testing, was one of the standards of the ASHRAE core guidelines. So they lied about following these. And that's why we're struggling so much, is because they're telling us everything is fine. We should just trust them. But when we ever check anything, we find that none of those things are true. Like we provide evidence, and they're like, well, those really high numbers, that's probably your child breathing on the Aeronet device, continuously increasing over 8 hours. Like it's not about science, it's about ideology. And that's the thing that we are struggling with the most. My background is in the area of computer science. And we kind of have this, we're doubtful, and we try to disprove things, and so we've provided these disproofs multiple times, but they're just simply not believed. And so that's one of the reasons why we felt like we had no other choice. There's no other method for parents to speak on this issue of indoor air quality within the school districts besides public pressure. That's it. And so the work that you're doing is very important.
Well, I just make jokes and rant, but like, so what's the next step here? Like, I if I understand your letter correctly, the way that this has been worked is there's been a complaint made to APEGA. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Association of Professional Engineers and Geologists for Alberta.
Okay, and what's the next step? Like, so you've said, hey, there's this scientific method that's supposed to go into determining the air quality. It doesn't appear to be being used. You've got a guy who apparently is presenting himself as an engineer who's not doing the things. Could you please look into that? What happens next?
Yeah, so the first step is that a professional engineer in the field is assigned to look at this particular case, and they'll look at all the evidence that's provided. So that includes any FOIP materials or any materials that they request, including the details of our complaint. And specifically what they're looking for is the code of conduct. So APEGA has its own code of conduct. It protects its members. It protects other engineers, because we want the name of being a professional engineer. They want the name of professional engineer to be protected, and so this is very important for the reputation, but also the trust that is put into professional engineers. So that needs to be investigated, and our plan is to just let that process go. But at some point, some of the people who are involved with the complaint will also need to present and answer some questions from the APEGA, like the people who are adjudicating this particular case. That has not happened yet, but that is part of the process, my understanding, before any decisions are made. And then ultimately a decision is made regarding the license. So like a person has a professional engineering license designation, they include it in all their emails. Are they allowed to continue using that or not? But ultimately, the decision is also going to be for the CCSD board. What do you want to do about that, right? Do you want to continue to only listen to this one individual for all of the indoor air quality recommendations?
For like 30 seconds.
Yeah, and approve them directly, or do you want to start listening to other perspectives? And that's the issue that we have, is that there's no other way. There is no other way for any parent or any individual to speak on indoor air quality within the Calgary Catholic School District.
Well, I think it sounds like that's a very important conversation that you've folks are you involved at all with because I know that there was another complaint that went in with the public school as well.
No, I wasn't directly involved with that. That was a different parent, and I highly recommend Amanda Hu. She does the Fresh Air School. She knows this stuff way better than I do, and a lot of the advice that we have actually comes from her. So I do need to give a lot of credit to Amanda for the support that she's provided.
Very cool. Well then, that's all I got. Thanks for tapping in, and I do want to apologize. Like here's the thing that I think if I can for the technical folks, I was confused when you were talking about the carbon dioxide. Like that was like a year ago, I think it was. I was confused when you were talking about it, and it's only because I don't like when things don't make sense to me. That I went and spent an unhealthy amount of time Googling, trying to educate myself about, okay, so what the hell was he talking about? Thank you for bringing that up. But technical folks, y'all have to figure out how to express these ideas.
There was a really great quote from Mary Ann Moser, who I think was leading TELUS Science. And one of the things that she said, and I had this problem for a long time, is like, how do we as scientists communicate that we need to do something about air quality? And I think one of the things that she mentioned was, if we go back to the days of smoking. So smoking was a big issue. We were trying to prevent people from smoking more. One of they tried all sorts of it's bad for your health and all this measurement, blah, blah, blah. And nobody really believed it. But it was actually the marketing campaigns that said, you know what, this is exactly what big tobacco wants you to do. Right? Like you think you're rebelling against the man by, smoking, and you're doing so well. But the reality is you're just working into the desires of a corporation. And that apparently worked really, really well for young people. And I think we need to put the same kind of messaging in when it comes to air quality. It's like people are pushing these things. Why do you think they haven't been pushing better air quality, those kind of things? There's entire industries that benefit from people constantly getting sick, people constantly, say purchasing masks for themselves. There's a whole industry around this. And so I think maybe when we start exposing a little bit more of this is what they want, they want you to be in these cycles forever. I think that we may be able to get a little bit more understanding of why things are the way they are.
Yeah, to me, it seems like the biggest theme is that they just don't want to. It's one of the lines that I like to use is the first step in solving any problem is admitting that you have one, and I think that there's certain folks I mean, we certainly saw it around COVID. Cough, Adriana Lagrange cough, and I didn't even mean to do the cough bit. That just happened. But there's certainly folks who are willing to go, I don't want to deal with this problem. So I'm just gonna la la la. Uh, and it seems like this is another one of those issues, because I imagine that, especially in some of these older schools, addressing the air quality issues is going to require some backwards engineering that I suspect wouldn't be done for free. And I think there's probably some people who don't want to own that particular problem.
Well, within the Calgary Catholic School District, I know that there was a proposal for installing HEPA filters in every school that worked out to about $2 million. And I want to be clear, like, the money is not and has never been the problem for CCSD. They take in $680 million a year. Their budget for just maintaining schools is over 10 times the amount that you would spend on things like HEPA filters. And I want to be also very clear that that $2 million amount would have easily been saved within the first year just from teacher absences. Like, we have spent so much money just on trying to find substitute teachers because they keep getting sick. So it feels like this is not a money issue, and it never was. It was always an ideology issue. It was people believing that ASHRAE is wrong. That's ideology. Or people believing that, all HEPA filters are just politics. That's ideology. That's where a lot of this problem comes from. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with the science. It has nothing to do with the numbers. It's just like, I choose to believe this, and I'm not going to change my mind ever. I don't care what kind of evidence you provide. What kind of numbers doesn't matter to me.
I mean, I know that I've been veering all over the religious lanes tonight, but it seems to me that there might be, and I don't remember the exact chapter and verse, but I recall there being a phrase about it to the effect of, it would be better for someone who would bring harm to a child that they have a millstone tied around their neck and thrown into the ocean than mess with my wrath. I feel like maybe that could be an applicable guideline here.
Well, one of the groups that has been supporting this a lot is the Catholics for Safe and Caring Schools. And a lot of their principles are based off of Matthew 23, which was how Jesus kind of rebuked a lot of the Pharisees. Like, we've been talking a little bit about the gay, like the LGBTQ events that have been happening. And Jesus was surprisingly chill about those individuals. He was surprisingly chill about even the prostitute, for example, because he knew that these are people that are doing this because they're in a situation, in a society that was created. One thing that he was not chill with was the people in power who were making decisions that caused this type of harm. And so his focus was on justice, was on providing mercy to these individuals, and faithfulness. And so I do believe, as Catholics, this is the kind of ministry that most closely aligns with the messaging we're getting from the Pope. And I believe that it's where we really need to head if we want to continue to have Catholic education in the future. Like, they're worried that maybe, some parents speaking up is going to destroy Catholic education. But let me be clear, we as parents make zero decisions, and we have zero say about anything that happens within Calgary Catholic. It will not be what parents say that cause Catholic education to disappear. It will be the decisions of the Calgary Catholic School District Board that will be the thing that ultimately terminates Catholic education. Because they refuse to listen. They refuse to listen to those voices. And so I see that as the biggest existential threat for Catholic education in Alberta.
Fair enough. Well, we'll be watching this, and please, loop us in as you get progress. The one thing that I just want to clarify for our end is I think that it's really important. And I leaned into this pretty heavy throughout the whole rant that I did earlier tonight, so I want to make it clear. I think that there's a really important distinction to be made between religious choices, professional choices, and somebody simply being who they are. And so I know that there are some faiths that take the opinion that somebody being LGBTQ2S plus is a choice. It's not a choice. It's who these people are. And so I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that point before I moved on to Ziad. But thank you so much, Dr. Ed, for tapping in tonight.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I agree with your point. One of the things I often say to Catholics is, we have to take responsibility, because many of the people who identify as LGBTQ are doing that because of abuses that they've experienced from people within the church. So we need to be way more forgiving and not saying like, oh, they can just change that. You made them.
Well,
so
I'm going to disagree with you on that one, because I think that it's I don't think that you can say that somebody being LGBTQ2S plus is the result of trauma.
Not universal.
Who they are. So yeah, I'm gonna jump on you for that one, but I do want to thank you so much for weighing in, and please do keep us abreast of what's going on with the air quality stuff. And I'm gonna bring in Ziad to raise my blood pressure, because he's very, very, very good at that. Ziad, what is going on tonight, my friend?
Hi, Nate. Great to hear from Dr. C. I have actually a few points that I'd like to add on, and then maybe if Dr. Z is willing to entertain a question or two. So I'm a professional engineer. I'm not a HVAC or a heating, ventilation, air conditioning engineer, but I'm a member of the Canadian Aerosol Coalition. Gosh, the exact name just escaped me. But I wanted to add on a couple of points to Dr. C's points. So CO2, I'm standing out in the parking lot right now, and it's smoky, but if this was fresh mountain air, we'd have 420 parts per million of CO2 in the air. And when Dr. C spoke about 5,000 parts per million of CO2, over 10 times the natural level, at that level, 1 in 10 breaths you're taking is recycled out of somebody else's lungs. So the risk of getting an infection from somebody else when 1 out of 10 inhales you make is somebody else's output is very high. Fresh air is not just anti-infection, but it, as Dr. C mentioned, lower absenteeism and better academic performance. So somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million of CO2, cognitive performance falls. And so a lot of this comes from airline pilots, military pilots testing their performance as CO2 levels go up in the cockpit. Not so much has been done with student performance. A little bit has, and we're seeing between 1,000 and 2,000 students perform poorly on exams. Their memory is worse, their thinking is worse. There was an Italian study connected to the flow rate of fresh air into a classroom and the absenteeism, and they found a direct correlation that the more fresh air you put into a classroom, the less absenteeism you have. In Alberta, unfortunately, our occupational health and safety laws don't protect students. So they protect the teachers, and really it's up to the teachers union to defend the teachers more about stale air or recirculated air in the classroom. But that's where one of the places we could see improving air quality could come from. And the other is with ASHRAE. So there's, as I understand it, there's an ASHRAE standard 62.1, which governs air quality within a building, but it's primarily set around comfort, and the building industry has a great deal of influence in that, especially in the United States where air conditioning bills are high. So their standard, if you could call it, is based around comfort, not based around the amount of recirculated or fresh air. So we as engineers and scientists have been working hard since the start of the pandemic to better develop standards and get them codified into engineering standards, engineering professional practice, and into building codes and operating requirements for school boards to have enough ventilation or fresh air and filtration in order to protect our students, protect our school population, our teachers, etc. And another one of the benefits that comes from this is less need for mask and better equity for people who have
that's what I was just going to say. Is
lower,
it seems
lower
to
resistance.
me that if you're going to make the argument that we have to keep schools open, damn the cost, then this would be one of those areas. It sounds like you're falling in a wind tunnel, man. But it seems to me if this was going to be, if you're going to make the argument is that there's nothing more important than kids being in school. They need it for their development. They need it for their education. Then this should be one of those things that goes, guess we're paying for that.
Yeah, and at a provincial level, the cost of air filtration and better ventilation compared to the cost of hospitalizing children or hospitalizing teachers, there's just no comparison. Like, to properly outfit a school for proper ventilation, enough air changes per hour, enough fresh air per student, and CO2 monitoring, and enough filtration, a couple of hospital visits pay for that. So there's just no comparison. You kind of have to do the math at the provincial government level, though, rather than at the school board level, because the school board doesn't pay the cost of hospitalization, right? But they do pay the costs of absent teachers. I'm not sure if you can hear me well, Nate. When you were speaking to me, I got a little bit of cut in and out. So I hope you can all hear me okay.
The wind is strong where you are, man.
Okay, good. If Dr. C, if you don't mind, if I could ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
The superintendent at the CCSD, is he a registered professional, a licensed professional engineer, and is he licensed in the HEVAC area?
The individual who is the licensed professional engineer, he is licensed with APEGA and he does have a license, but his engineering area is civil engineering. It is not in anything to do with ventilation.
I'll tell you what we're going to do here. Dr. Ed, you talked about Amanda Hu. And Ziad, I can tell that you have a big interest in this. I'm going to try to reach out to a couple of people who are signatories, a couple of the other people who are signatories to the letter. I'm going to try to reach out to Amanda Hu, and I'm going to see if we're going to have a whole conversation around the air quality piece and get into the nitty gritty of that. And I only am saying that we're going to move away from it because Ziad sounds like he's falling down a wind tunnel, and I want to make sure that when we have this conversation, given that I just did a whole thing about how we have to have effective communications when we're talking about technical issues. I think if we're going to have a technical conversation, which I'm totally up for, then we need to make sure that it's working in a way that people can hear it. Plus, I have another speaker who's waiting to jump in. So I'm going to open it up to, I think it's Theris. And we'll see what is going on with Theris tonight.
Hello.
Hi there.
I just thought I would comment on the LGBTQ pride stuff.
Okay.
And I'm not an expert like other people who comment, so I just have my life and my experiences, but I am queer and I do work with adult immigrants to Canada, so I see both of those in a bit of overlap. And I also know from my past, when I was 14 or so, I decided being gay was a choice and it was a sin. So I decided I wasn't gay, and that lasted surprisingly long before I stopped lying to myself. But just to say, on one side, I can imagine myself as a 14-year-old kid at that school avoiding a pride event because I couldn't figure out how it would reconcile with my religion. And then when I hear this teacher and her passion, but what I hear the most is that line, "You don't belong here." And as we listen again, I hear it. She's not calling out individual students and saying you don't belong in this country, which is important, but it does um, it's still a very hard to hear sort of sentence that feels to me very anti-immigrant, which maybe it isn't. And I'm not going to say this teacher is, or that's her opinion or whatever, but that's what I hear when I hear it.
Yeah,
is-
and clearly a lot of other people did hear that, and I can understand fully why people would hear what she was saying. They would hear the frustration and the anger and the hurt in her voice, and go, "Oh, that's she's saying that people are not welcome in Canada." And I want to be really clear. What I took out of and I completely understand, like I said, how people can hear that and go to that place. But what I took out of what she was saying is not, "Hey, we don't want to have immigrants in Canada." I didn't get any of that. What I got was, if you're going to be part of Canadian society, if you want to be a part of Canadian society, these are the rules. These are literally the laws that govern Canadian society. And the if that's difficult to hear, maybe it needs to be said more, because I did not hear at any point her say, nor have I heard any sort of rhetoric saying, we don't want to have Muslims in Canada. If we did hear any of that, if she had said something like that, I want to be very clear, we'd be all over that in a heartbeat, because that is completely unacceptable rhetoric. But I think the part of what happened is she said what needs to be said, in that we have rules in this country. And it seems like, and I think we saw it with COVID, I think COVID certainly exacerbated it. And there are people a growing number of people who believe that they can make their own rules. And one of the finer points that ultimately has to do with this whole conversation is, not only is it legislated under Section 15 of the Charter, what the rules are and how protection works and how inclusivity works by law, but it's actually also legislated the reasons that kids don't have to be in school. And I don't like pride isn't on that list. So if you're going to skip school, if your kids are not, you're actually financially liable if it becomes a problem that the school and the school board believe that it's a big enough problem. It's $100 a day that parents can be fined for their kids not being in school. So the importance of school and kids attending school is made very, very clear through legislation. The importance of tolerance and inclusivity is made very, very clear through legislation. And where I get squirrely is if anybody says, "Hey, you are failing the standards," legal standards. I'm not talking about abstracts. You're failing the legal standards of what it is to be Canadian. You're failing to teach your kids the legal standards of what it is to be Canadian. If we say that, and the immediate response is that's anti-immigrant, or that's Islamophobic, or depending on whatever demographic we're talking about, then the danger that I see is, first of all, that's operating under the assumption that this is a belief that is shared universally. There are lots of gay Catholics. There are, I think there's 1 billion, probably I think it's 1 billion, 2 billion Muslims in the world. Well, if you do the math, if 1 in every 4 people are LGBTQ2S+, there's a boatload, and some of them publicly identify. I'm not going to list off any names because that's not my place, but some of them publicly identify as being gay Muslims. This is to say that, saying, "Hey, this is literally antithetical to the values of Canadian." For anybody to say, "Oh, that's anti-whatever," no, it's not. Because you can't present, I don't believe, any religion, any faith as a monolith. Because there will be, take a look at why we have all of these other churches that aren't Catholic And it's because there was a disagreement. That's just the reality. And so recognizing that in public spaces and in public places, there are rules that exist for how people have to conduct themselves, and advocating for those rules. Again, like I don't make any bones about the fact that she was passionate and she was very clearly angry. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are going to listen to my my little opining tonight and raise concerns about the level of intensity in my voice. But if that's the only thing that we're attacking people for, is the passion for which they're defending Canadian values of inclusivity, of tolerance. If that's what we're attacking people for, it kind of feels like, to me at least, we've lost the plot a little bit.
I think something that you clarified for me was because she kind of said along the lines of like, if you don't believe in the law, then you don't belong here. But I think, well, there's lots of laws that say a certain provincial government might be passing right now that I don't agree with. So should I leave Alberta? But it's not just a law, it's the charter.
Yeah, like this
And
isn't
making
just
that
Danielle Smith's
distinction.
Sovereignty Act here. This is a foundational
Yeah,
document
you knew
that
which one I was
defines.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, making that distinction. And of course, she's talking to kids, teenagers. So she's not necessarily going into the specifics in her little passionate rant, right? But
Well, we
I
also
think
don't know
that
how much of the rant, like
distinction.
the recording comes in, and we don't know what happened before that. We don't know what the preamble conversation was. I mean, I'm not, and in no way am I saying this is what happened, but it's entirely possible that somebody in that classroom, teacher, student, whatever, could have said something to the effect of, "I don't believe that the gays have any place in this school." And this was part of her response. We have an incomplete picture. And one of the other big beefs that I have with this whole situation is we have people and organizations that are making snap judgments about this snippet of an audio recording, and we don't know what the context is. And when you don't know what the context of a thing is, it becomes very, very easy for people to sort of plant seeds. Because if you hadn't heard that audio recording, and your introduction to that audio recording was the statement that was released by the NCCM, where they said, "This is deeply Islamophobic," you've already pried the pump. Anybody who listening to that is already going to be listening to it through the one snippet that has no context. They're going to be listening to that through the lens of, well, the NCCM said it was deeply Islamophobic, it must be Islamophobic. And this is why I say, and what I tried to say at the beginning, is that if we can't even have the conversation around, well, but is it Islamophobic? If we can't have that conversation because we're afraid that people are going to cancel us or call us Islamophobes, that to me is the literal definition of the word.
And then I'll just add one other little beef I had with your the post that voted on the breakdown was the reference to the oath of citizenship, which is more of a beef with the oath of citizenship, that as long as we're asking people to swear allegiance to the king, I think it's a joke.
I don't disagree with you on that, and I have tried to get. I know that there's a current legal action where there's a bunch of First Nations and Indigenous lawyers who are saying, "Well, that's kind of bullshit because y'all colonized us, and we don't really want to swear allegiance to that." I think that there's a much bigger, more nuanced conversation to be had around, well, the monarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's is a different conversation, but I think it's also, I guess it connects it back to immigration for me, because people who grow up in Canada and even children who go through the Canadian school, even if they are not born here, are, well, maybe I take that back. I'm not sure about that one, but definitely people who are born here do not ever have to say the oath of citizenship.
That's true. But I would argue, and as much as I personally disagree with the whole monarchy piece, so I'm on the same page with you 100% there. I think that that's kind of garbage. But I would argue that if we're going to say to new Canadians who do have to swear the oath of allegiance, if we're going to say, hey, this is what you got to swear to, and it boils down to okay, let's ignore the monarchy piece, but you're swearing you're swearing that you will uphold Canada, you will uphold Canadian laws, you'll all of that piece. I personally think we need to do a better job. I find anecdotally, with no evidence to back me up whatsoever, that more often than not, new Canadians do a better job of living up to the ideals that are enumerated in the Charter, because they have to learn about it, and in order to get citizenship. I think that we have a lot of citizens who are born that way who have not had it properly impressed upon them what the values are in Canada, what the Charter means, what the progress is that we've come as a nation. I think that we need to do a much better job, which is, again, one of the reasons why I'm coming to this teacher's defense as voraciously as I am, because she's trying to do that. She's trying to say to kids who are in Canada, most of which I presume are citizens, or permanent residents, whatever the case may be. She's trying to impress upon them the importance of these values, and for her to be vilified for doing that, I think is deeply, deeply problematic, at least for me.
That's fair. But I don't know that I have the same anecdotal experience, which just is like...
That's the fun about anecdotal experiences. Nobody can back it up.
There's no evidence, but I was just saying, like, I'm not out to my students. I teach immigrant adults, and was like, I'm very in the closet when I'm at work and teaching, and that kind of sucks, but doesn't feel safe. And then you think, well, maybe I'm just making the problem worse by not doing anything, but also...
You know what? For what it's worth, and again, I'm going to be anecdotal here, what you've described through your life journey, it sounds like you've had a pretty uphill battle, and the fact that you felt the need to try to repress who you are because of things that were put around you. I don't think anybody gets to say, "Oh, you should be doing more," and this is one thing that I really, really do want to be clear on. I wasn't traumatized into being straight. You can't do that, and you can't traumatize someone into being gay or LGBTQ2S+. It's just not how it works. People are who they are, and that's it. And it scares me when, like, this is one of the reasons why the whole conversion therapy line to me is so dangerous, is you can traumatize people into denying who they are. And when we talk about things like conversion therapy, that's exactly what it does. It doesn't change like conversion therapy doesn't work. The science is in. That's done. And when you have people who have been the victims of conversion therapy who say, oh yeah, I totally prayed the gay away or whatever, that's not who they are speaking. That's the trauma of the conversion therapy speaking. And, it's to me, I was born straight. It is what it is. But in the same way that I was born straight, I also recognize that there are lots of people who are born a lot of other things, because it's not a binary state. It's a spectrum. And the fascination that society has with saying to people, I need to make sense of your sex life or who you're attracted to or who you love. Like, take up making puzzles or something. Find a new hobby. And I'm sorry if I overstepped with that. I really wasn't trying to.
No, that's good. I agree.
Thank you so much for weighing in and having a conversation, because that is so much like you and I had some points that we differ on, and that's totally okay. But this is the fundamental piece for me is we have to be willing to have these conversations. We have to be willing to listen to each other and say, "Hey, maybe I'm getting it, maybe I'm not," or maybe you've presented things in a slightly different way. And I mean, I'll go with what Dr. Ed was saying about he came on the show, I don't know, like a year ago, and he was talking about the whole carbon dioxide measuring thing. I didn't get it, and I took the time to learn. Now I get it. So cool. That's a thing that I learned. It doesn't make me lesser. And I really think that we need to, as a society, disabuse ourselves of the notion that being wrong about something is bad. Being wrong is an opportunity to learn. And I'm going to move on and give Cassandra here the opportunity to tell me how I'm wrong too. So Cassandra, what's going on tonight?
Well, I tapped in kind of late because I was at a barbecue, but I was just overhearing and you know, I just wanted to just weigh in on like the whole swearing allegiance thing. We swear allegiance to the king right now because we are a we're a country that is a constitutional monarchy. There is a discussion about whether we should continue to be a constitutional monarchy, and if we cease to be a constitutional monarchy, we will still have to swear an allegiance of loyalty to the country to be like for citizens or for certain levels of public office.
Yep.
So I just wanted to make that distinction because I understand where she was coming from, but and I think maybe that teacher, however she phrased it, I didn't actually hear the video, but that's probably more what she was leaning towards, was that you're swearing allegiance to become a citizen because you weren't born here. I mean, we assume that people are born here have a certain amount of loyalty to the country because it is your country of origin. And when my grandparents came here, they had to do a citizenship ceremony and swear allegiance to the country via the monarchy. But if we had not been a constitutional monarchy, they still would have had to swear allegiance of loyalty to the country that they were wanting to become citizens of. And I think that that's the important thing, because by doing that, you are acknowledging that we're also a secular society. We accept all religions and all ways of being under the law and under our Constitution, in that people come here because of that. And by virtue of that, there may be things in our Constitution that may not 100% align with some your faith or other ideologies, but by becoming a part of our society, and you're saying that you are going to respect the ways of our society in Canada. And I think that that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. And I would also highlight the fact that when we're talking about, I mean, you can exist in your religion and faith and also exist in society. And how each individual does that is going to vary. But one thing's for sure, when you take a look at what countries of those 8 that I talked about earlier that will put LGBTQ2S plus people to death for being who they are, they're not purely secular societies. I'm not saying,
no, they aren't.
Just saying.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's when societies move away from secularism that they tend to have more of these rigid views about, how people should be. And it tends to also lead to, I mean, I think it's funny because a lot of people think of Canada, because of who the founders of Canada were, as that we're a Christian society, a mostly Christian society, in some ways, and that maybe some of our common law is even based on that. But but any kind of, that's, I mean, we like to talk about the importance of separation of church and state. And I don't know that we have it technically in our constitution like they do in the United States, but we still, we still follow in the spirit of it, and we believe in the spirit of that, in that, and that's what allows us to be secular, right? Is that ability to differentiate, because if when we cease to be secular, then it's not just people, people's gender identification or sexuality or race that become an issue now, because now if you don't worship the right religion, it becomes an issue, and it's not a very fun rabbit hole to want to go down. And I also wanted to point out that, speaking of, there are Islamic people that are also from the LGBTQ community. One of our favorite former mayors, was one of those people. And, I think that's,
I'm
yeah,
not gonna.
I don't think it
I'm a big
matters.
believer in not naming names, because it's not my place to do that. But there is no shortage of examples of Muslim members of the LGBTQ2 plus community, and that's just the numbers game. Like,
Well, it is, and I mean, if you think, I mean, I have two pastors in my family, and one of them has become very extreme, and he says him and his wife have faced backlash from our family, because my family mostly is Christian. I mean, I have some Muslim members of my family and members of other religions, but mostly Christian, and they have faced backlash for saying hateful, trying to use scripture to flaunt hatred towards the LGBT community, because the majority of my family believe that, God made you, and God doesn't make mistakes.
there you go.
And so, you know what I mean? And so, all unfortunate, that's the unfortunate thing about religion, is it's often, I mean, if you can, most of these scriptures you can read, and you can ask somebody, well, can you pinpoint, where it says that this isn't a thing? And then when you actually read the thing, and if you use some critical thinking, you might say, well, does it really say that? Because I don't see how it says that.
I mean,
It's used as a way to, you often use religious texts as a way to vilify themselves, and unfortunately use it as a way to confirm that what they're doing is right.
yeah, I always go back, like, to me, any time that you take any religious section or verse in isolation from the greater work, you're setting yourself up for failure. And anybody who disagrees with me, do me a favor. I'm so excited about the next speaker that we have up here. But anybody who disagrees with me, do me a favor and go ahead and Google the West Wing radio host, because it is some of the best writing you will ever see. And I'm still working on committing that whole thing to memory. But thank you so much for weighing in, Cassandra.
No problem.
All right, I'm going to bring in our next, and I might even go so far as to say, oh no, there's one other person maybe we'll be bringing in. I'm going to bring in our next speaker, because I'm excited to hear what she's going to say. And I feel like it's going to be fiery. This next speaker, I'll full disclosure, huge fan of her, and I would consider her to be a close friend. So I have all kinds of bias, and I'm just going to get out of her way now. Lana Bentley, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well, Nate, and thank you for allowing me to call into the show tonight. You and I have had many, many interesting discussions over the years, and certainly what you've created tonight certainly fits with that. You're always curating spaces for people to exchange ideas, so thank you. Nate, I just wanted to thank you for clarifying that the assumption that kids are traumatized and therefore that somehow influences their sexual development. I wanted to thank you for clarifying your position on this so that people who are listening to your show tonight understand that while there can be many opinions on sexuality and gender expression, I think part of what's really challenging right now is that when opinions get treated as facts and go unchecked, I think that can be both dangerous and irresponsible and cause harm to young people. And so I certainly don't want to offer an opinion on anything else that you've touched upon tonight, other than to say that as somebody who is qualified to comment on mental health, that's my career, and who has worked in the area of family violence, I was certainly very pleased to hear you clarify that there can be a variety of different outcomes of sexual abuse, not necessarily leading to a child becoming gay. And quite frankly, it is both exhausting and troubling that the lives of members of marginalized groups continue to be the subject of wild speculation. I think that it's never a bad thing to have spirited conversations, but I do think there needs to be some responsibility, or at the very least some grounding in where comments are coming from. Opinions and feelings are valid, they're just not facts. Thank you.
I couldn't see. I love when you speak, Lana, because I'll be very, very candid with everyone here. Usually, if I have an idea and I'm like 50-50 on where is this just an idea or is this something that I should chase down, the number of times that Lana has talked me off of the ledge of should I post this, I can't even begin to tell you. And she comes to this conversation from a place of incredible experience and advocacy and qualification, to be clear. So she's soft pedaling her background and her resume a little bit there, but she's at the top of the list of people that I go to when I'm like, am I wrong? And she tolerates those conversations incredibly well.
Well, Nate, I do want to thank you for your high praise, and I certainly understand that many of the issues you brought up tonight are quite emotional, and I think that you and I have both run for office, and though that may have came from an emotion of being highly motivated and inspired and hopeful. I know that evidence-based decision-making is something that I think most people would agree they also want to see really important decisions for the broader community being rooted in. I think better evidence and better data lead to better decisions, and it has certainly been quite disturbing and troubling to see issues facing gender and sexually diverse communities really be rooted in emotion rather than anything else right about now. And I would also like to add, I know this is being recorded and being redistributed. If there are any people from gender and sexually diverse communities listening to your program, which I have every confidence there are, please know that you are okay, you will be okay, and this too shall pass. And there are people out there thinking about you and working towards making sure you are protected and respected.
You stole my clothes, Lana.
Well, I don't know, Nate. Great minds think alike.
You totally stole my clothes. I was gonna end with something similar to that, and now I'm gonna have to reformat it in my head quickly as I bring it to the wrap up, because we're coming to the 2-hour mark. We got some interviews coming up. I'm really excited about. We have one that we're recording tomorrow. Fingers crossed. Where we're going to be talking with a very high-profile member of the political scene in Alberta and Calgary in particular. I'm not going to say the name because I never do until they're actually recorded and in the can. But if everything goes great, I am so excited to be bringing that conversation. And then we also have a couple of other ones that are coming up that are going to be a little bit more on the spicy side too. So look for those interviews. Hopefully Wednesday, Thursday, depends on how long it takes to edit them, but they will be up immediately for our Patreon supporters. And this is where I do the quick plug before as I rapidly try to reformat my clothes in my head here. All of our Patreon supporters get early access to our interview episodes and the warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from knowing that you're supporting a program that is stressing out some of the political elite in this province. You too could be one of our Patreon supporters for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee every month or less. I mean, we have some Patreon supporters who are on the fancy cup of coffee every 6 months amount. And if that's what you got, that's what you got. And if you don't have that, that's cool too, because we will never paywall any of our content. All of it will eventually be available 3 or 4 days later, because that's how conversations work. We can't hide behind the stuff. So if you aren't able to, and I know that we do have a lot of people who listen to the program who are, the biggest issue in this last election was affordability. There's a lot of people who are dealing with some pretty heavy financial constraints. That's totally cool. You'll get the content eventually. And if you can share some stuff in the meantime, that would be absolutely delightful. The thing that I want to end on is, Lana is 100% absolutely right. And one of the things that has come up, and I suspect at its core, one of the reasons why there are members of a bunch of different communities, when they even hear anything affiliated with their community get mentioned, the immediate reaction is defensiveness. And I think a big part of that happens because there are so many people who are targeting these groups. I want to be very clear. Everything that I've said tonight, in no way, in any shape or form, is to suggest that Islamophobia isn't a thing and it isn't a problem. We have talked about the hate crimes that go on in this province many times on this program. We have talked about how Muslims get targeted. This is not in any way to say any of that. There are a lot of people who are finding themselves in social crosshairs. And as we talked about after the election, it is incumbent on those of us who do have privilege, who maybe aren't quite in those crosshairs or have the experience and resources to effectively stand up against those, to stand beside the people who are afraid because they are being targeted for who they are. And my friend Lana is 100% correct. If you're somebody who's listening to this space is live right now, if you're somebody who's listening to the podcast, if you're watching the video, good for you for sticking around for 2 hours, first of all. But if you're a member of a community that is being targeted, please know that there are a lot of people who are pulling for you. And there are a lot of people who are trying to line up to stand with you. And one of the mandates of this show that we've had since day one is that we are going to try to make sure that people whose voices aren't heard or people who feel like they're falling through the cracks know that there are people who are trying to help. We may not get it right all the time, but we're trying. And for anybody who's in any of those communities, I can't speak with the lived experience that Lana Bentley has on so many things. But I can tell you that I look at people who I am extremely fortunate to have in my life, like Lana Bentley, and they are in such good places. And those good places come. And so if you're somebody who's feeling dejected, scared, disappointed, any of the things, it can and will get better. And there are lots of social supports that are out there. There are crisis lines that are out there. Don't be afraid to reach out to them, because there are professionals who are in a wonderful position to support you. But hang in there, because it does absolutely get better. I've said it before on the show. I'll say it again. Stealing from the incomparable Jon Stewart, whom I know Lana Bentley is also a tremendous fan of. The moral arc of history only bends toward justice because there are people who are pushing it that way. And as much as it may seem like there are a lot of people who are trying to push it away, there's more of us that are trying to push it in the right direction. And that is ultimately, to me, what I see when I look at people celebrating Pride. I see the protest. I see the celebration. I see the recognition that there's still a lot of work to do. But in Canada, we've made some pretty big grounds, and we've covered that ground because of the ideals of what this country aspires to be. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's been listening tonight, everybody who's weighed in. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's listening on the Twitter Spaces. I want to say a special thank you to our chat section tonight. You guys have been absolutely on fire, and I haven't been able to keep up. So as soon as I'm done here, you better believe I'm going to go through and read all of the comments that are in the chat, because wow, you guys you've been busy tonight, and I absolutely love that, because every time I finish a show, every time I go back and I read through the chat, I always find something that inspires me, and 9 times out of 10 I learn something. So thank you to everybody who's been a part of the chat tonight. We're going to be dropping our episode on Wednesday or Thursday, give or take, depending on how the interviews go this week. But we will be back for another live show next Sunday, 8 o'clock. We will see you then. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Don't be afraid to take some breaks. But after the breaks are over, keep the conversation going.
Thank you.